Kill the intruder.
Come here, kill me! Kill me, come on!
More often than not, most experiences in gaming tend to be one and done, where a solid playthrough of something is more than enough. But there are a few exceptions, where even if I'll eventually get bored of something, it would take a tremendously long time for that to happen. Games like Ultrakill, Doom Eternal, CSGO, TF2, the Soul series, the classic Dooms, Skyrim, Mountain Blade, etc. These are just one of many that I can play over and over again. One in particular is DUSK. I made a review for it some time ago, but this time around I wanted to revisit it and reflect on why I keep coming back to it and what sets it apart from all the other retro shooters. This won't be too long of a video, but more as an appreciation video for how awesome this game is. Part of what I really liked about the first Quake was its sci-fi and medieval marriage, with cosmic horror flavour added into it. To an extent, DUSK does the same thing, but makes the player a redneck with a long beard who goes through arenas filled with scarecrows, chainsaw-wielding hillbillies, raspy cultists that throw fireballs, and other horrible monstrosities. Its setting gives off that country town vibe that progressively gets more distorted throughout each episode. Like in the foothills, it's mostly countryside that becomes more industrial over time. The second episode is more of that but with impossible geometry and more grotesque creatures. And the third is like being in a whole different dimension basically. Which is also where the story picks up a bit more, leading to the leader of the cult as well as the entity that's pulling the strings. It makes do with its retro style graphics that I make an exception for since I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of them. It takes that same graphic style of the first Quake and gives it an upgrade, taking into account of its atmosphere and its sense of dread, which DUSK has in spades. Like Ultrakill, you have a great deal of mobility and advanced movements to make, having complete vertical and horizontal rotation, sliding to dodge projectiles and lunges. The B-hopping technique which gives you ridiculous speed, and even crossbow hopping which gives you suspension in the air. It makes other retro games feel by the book in comparison because it gives you freedom in how you want to move, and it also gets rid of the idea of fall damage and being underwater for too long, since they're removed entirely in this game. It's just pure Quake style action, fused with a metal soundtrack similar to the recent Doom entries, which stays consistent and slows down and speeds up at the right time, always keeping you hooked. The setting itself is also something I really like, and as I had said, each episode has something different to offer. Take something like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the dried and nearly lifeless terrain of Texas or to some extent rural Pennsylvania, which is where the developer comes from. You add in Lovecraftian or sci-fi horror elements and you end up getting something like DUSK. A lot of the levels are detailed and memorable, and oftentimes they have a lot of nooks and crannies that often change your perception of the level. Like in the Erebus reactor level, the ceilings reveal surrounding skyscrapers, distorting your sense of location, or a gigantic fortress in the sky that's more like a temple than a factory. Or the level Homecoming where a familiar place is distorted into a place of torment and regret, so to speak. Its weapons are somewhat basic in terms of design, but this was done on purpose. The game starts you off with the sickle, which is fairly weak, but attacks really fast, and if you time it right, you can deflect projectiles with it. Later on, you eventually find the sword, which is like an upgraded version of your melee weapon. You can hold the right mouse button to block projectiles, but it does cost morale, which is basically the game's version of armor. You can do the regular normal attack, which actually kills cultists in one hit, except for the upgraded versions. A fully charged attack will do even more damage, and even one-shot most enemies. But, for it to work, you need to remain at 100 HP for it to work. So if you want to use it, avoid taking damage, if possible. Otherwise, it's still a really good melee weapon, and after you get it, you pretty much stop using the sickles altogether. The pistol is standard fare, but it's reliable against weaker foes, and two of them pack a decent punch. The same extends to the shotgun, which is like the one Arnold uses in Terminator 2, except you can carry two of them once you find another. The super shotgun is like what you'd expect, powerful and reliable, but chews for ammo like crazy. The assault rifle bridges between World War II and Korean War era weaponry, and has an old school feel to its approach, also just as reliable if not more than the pistol. The hunting rifle, which is my favourite weapon in the game, is something you'd use in the woods hunting game. Its rate of fire is slow, but it packs a mean punch, one-shotting a good number of enemies and is somewhat useful for boss fights. The crossbow's piercing is great for crowd control, and if you're up in the air you can keep shooting downward to keep yourself suspended. The mortar is also a really good weapon, and its remote det function allows for more calculated explosions. making it a really useful weapon for hairy arenas. And finally, the Riveter, a rocket launcher on speed basically. It's fast firing, its damage is devastating, and also, you can rocket jump with it like you can in Quake. The enemies themselves have a myriad of different designs that complement their environment. The cultists in robes and the hillbillies with chainsaws fit the rundown rural areas of Texas and Pennsylvania, as well as the bloody goats. And the industrial factories filled with death squads are not unlike the rundown facilities during the Soviet era. And finally, the third episode just doesn't hold back with its designs, that are both abstract and unnatural, adding more tension to an already alien and hostile world. Throughout the game, you're taunted by who is supposedly the leader of the cult, but like I said, there's another entity that's pulling the strings, who turns out to be one of the Lovecraftian entities, Nyarlathotep, who is the final boss and is someone that you don't even beat, giving a sense of hopelessness to the whole ordeal, that the turn of events are much bigger than you, and there's not much you can do about it at all besides just killing everything that's in your way, which fits the Lovecraftian aspect of this game, fighting something that is beyond your comprehension. So what sets it apart? Why do I keep coming back to it? Well, for me, it successfully cherry picks the best parts of its main inspirations while not being an exact replica of them, so to speak. The levels are well structured without being confusing, the weapons are all useful and when comboed together can be quite effective, every gun serves a purpose, the game is packed with content, each episode containing 11 levels that all offer something different without it feeling the same. It does more with its movement than other retro shooters have, with the only exception being Ultrakill. Its soundtrack is also perfect. This is my favourite out of Andrew Holschultz's compositions so far, and is just as good as the Doom soundtracks in my opinion. It's also highly replayable, and every time I play it I get a different experience from before. Maybe I'm snappier and faster than usual, or making a slower approach is more favourable, especially in Duskmere, where one hit from any enemy can kill you. Dusk just brings so much to the table while elevating old school gameplay with more dynamic movement involved. Speaking of dynamic, the game also gives you a ton of presets, which customizes your visual experience of the game, changing the atmosphere each time. There are even retro filters like in Ultrakill that provides that PSX vibe to an already retro looking game if that's your thing. The game is just incredible, and I hold it as a shooter that other shooters should aspire to be. I would love to see a sequel, but at the same time it would have to be drastically different, which is something that the developer David Szymanski himself said. It's like with Doom 16 and Doom Eternal. They're both similar but play completely different from each other. And for something that sets such a high standard, reinventing the wheel or changing the formula from the predecessor prevents derivative sequels. Case in point, games like Call of Duty and Assassin's Creed. A Dusk 2 would be awesome, but we'll all be waiting a long while for that. Thank you for watching.